because I've got the chance to talk to leading people in the industry, amazing musicians that are just killing it in the game, doing things that are just beyond your wildest imagination. And today, right now, I have probably one of the persons that I've been most excited to. I just been looking forward to interviewing you for a very long time. Ever since I found out that I was going to interview you, I have Miss Bonnie McIntosh, amazing musician, joining me. How are you, Bonnie?
I'm excellent. This is my first day, my first NAMM day, so I'm like not tired yet.
Good.
At all. So.
Good. I was telling her how lucky she is because when you come to the show and you're just walking around, people are saying hello and you're doing some cool stuff. It's amazing, but it's so draining because there's so much to do and so much to see.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Bonnie, I want to just sort of start off by some of the people who have may have not heard of you. You are a very talented musician, talented keyboardist. You play with some of the most amazing people in the industry. Why don't you go ahead and start off by telling us a little bit about how you got started in the music industry and maybe how you started doing it professionally.
Okay. Well, I grew up playing classical piano. I started when I was 5, did only classical music. I went to Cal State Los Angeles for classical piano.
Sisula?
And yeah, I was on the
soccer team. I know Sisula.
Really?
I went to CSUN, so like,
okay.
Cal State's, it's a California University
Cal
college.
State. I was on the soccer team there, so we played you guys, I think.
Yeah, we lost. We lost.
Well, when I was at Cal State LA, I started studying classical piano, and then I met these guys that were starting a band, so I started a band, and then I realized how much I loved performing. So that's what kind of switched me over from doing classical to pop music, because it was like punk and rock first, because I just really enjoyed performing, jumping around on stage, and doing more than just kind of sitting behind my board. So that was what I wanted to do. I applied to Musicians Institute. I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship.
Nice.
And I just threw myself into the audition process before I was ready. I didn't know anything.
Really?
And yeah, first audition I did.
Well, like, what did you do, if I can ask? Because I know that a lot of people, when they decide to pursue music full time and they choose the school they want to go to, whether it be Berkeley, Juilliard, MI, or some other amazing school, sometimes there are guidelines on what you should learn. Did you follow those, or did you just teach yourself everything you could?
Well, with my classical background, I was able to really kind of skip ahead. So I was in all the advanced theory classes, but I was in like the worst ear training classes, because it was like I could read anything, but I couldn't improvise to save my life. So I had to, that is kind of what I learned going from there. And then I learned about programming, building sounds, making sounds, and I was being introduced to new workstations. So when I went through the audition process, I sucked terribly. Kind of learned by failing.
Ms. Bonnie sucked? I find that hard to believe.
Oh, I'm sure there's footage somewhere of very unfortunate moments in my career. But and then when I started getting work and I started working more, I fell in love with it, and I became just so used to being on stage and bringing the performance aspect to being a keyboard player instead of just focusing on, on the musicianship part of it, kind of looking at it as a whole. So then it just continued, and now I'm here talking to you about it. So
now we're here talking. Fast forward a couple of years. I'm curious, and here's one of the things where I'm hoping you can teach me something, because I sort of went the opposite route of what you did. I started out being self-taught, and then I jumped into the jazz world, and I learned a lot about ear stuff. I learned about chord progressions and all that. But I'm a drummer, so it's a little bit different. But for you started in the classical world. I'm curious, for a lot of classical musicians out there, there's this sort of common belief amongst other musicians that it's sort of hard for classical musicians to break away from that mold, to improvise, to hear. Is that somewhat true, as someone who comes from that world?
That is like absolutely 1,000% true. At least it was for me. I can't speak for everybody, but I do know for me, getting past especially with the classical music, there's a lot of emotional interpretation. So playing to a click I didn't know what that was, from like when I started playing in bands and everything and getting used to that. So it was definitely a transition, to be honest. And there are a lot of benefits from it. You just have the technique down, you can obviously sight read and stuff, which people don't really need to use that these
Not in the
days.
pop world, at least.
But
Well, I asked that because classical musicians, you guys are insane. You guys are beyond. I would argue you guys are probably at the top of the food chain in terms of musicality.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's true. I would argue that it's true. But for you, what you're doing now sort of bridges both worlds, because for those of you guys who do not know, you play for some of the biggest artists in the world, and I don't say that lightly, you really do. And so to imagine that at a time you didn't know how to play the click blows my mind, because now you're on stage basically every day, around fireworks, playing to thousands of people every day. Like, I guess I'm curious about what was it specifically that you did to break away from that mold to get comfortable with playing with the click? I mean, obviously you probably just did it, but I'm curious if like you had a bit of a technique or a bit of a plan to get to that point.
The thing that I did the most was honestly just blast it and just practicing it, just blasting it in my dorm at the time when I was in school. I also was playing in all these bands too, so I was playing with these drummers, and I remember there was one time where before I really was good at that, I had this drummer that would just throw sticks at me every time I was off.
Really?
Yeah, it was the best way to get me in shape, and that was just when I was in some punk band in college. And then I just kind of got used to it, and then when I started doing pop music, where you have, you're playing with track and the clicks in your ear, you just kind of get used to it, and now it's like second nature. But I definitely remember the time where that was not the case, because the transition over is kind of different.
Yeah, and I can imagine so, but you did it flawlessly, because now, fast forwarding from your schooling, fast forwarding from the time that you were learning how to play, and now that you're playing for amazing artists, can you just tell me a little bit of how did you find yourself playing for some of these big artists that you play with? Can we actually say one of the artists that you play for?
Yeah,
is that
of
okay?
course. Yeah,
you play for Selena Gomez,
yes,
which is one of the biggest artists in the world, and you managed to get that gig and managed to do your part to bring it alive. And when I see your videos, I'm like, yeah, that's what a musician should do. You're part of the performance. You add some energy, and I can see your finesse and your talent in there. How did that happen, if I can ask?
That happened by, a lot of it was luck. I have to be honest about that. A lot of it was luck. A lot of it was being at the right place at the right time and not getting let go. So the way, because
don't
a lot
get fired.
of,
It's basically
just basically don't get fired. So I met the music director. Through like mutual friends, and he brought me in to actually do a rehearsal with Selena, and the original rehearsal was to help prepare her for something, and then it was before her album Revival came out, and then there was some promo that was going on, so I was in that, and it was just kind of, as that album was building up, there was more and more promotional shows for her to do, and they happened to take me on all of those promotional shows. So we did Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show, just the whole late night music circuit. And then they announced this big giant world tour. We got a bunch of dancers. They kind of switched out some band members, and then they asked me to do it. So when I say like, don't get fired, it was like I could have just not been called any of those times. So I was fortunate enough to stay with the band and with the project for basically the entire time the tour went on. And from that, just kind of, there was a huge name on my resume, so then more work kind of started, and I got a couple other tours after that, and it was a very, very lucky job that I got, and then I was able to showcase my skills. So I didn't actually audition for that.
It sort of fell in your lap and you ran with it. Did you feel like you were ready? Because I know we were talking about how you didn't feel like you were ready. Like, so then that opens up a whole bunch of questions. Yeah. But I'm curious, like, did you just think when you were called in for that rehearsal that this was just one-time thing, that you weren't going to do it ever again?
When I saw this email and I was like, I don't care what happens, I'm going to keep this job until they peel me off the stage. Like that was my mindset. That probably sounds a little psychotic when I say it out loud, but it was just one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to figure out whatever I need to figure out in order to keep this gig. So I built a rig of boards I didn't even have, and I figured out as much as I could without actually having shit. And then I sent out a writer, and actually the people at Roland have my original writer. It's literally stick figures of the boards that I wanted.
That's hilarious.
It was just, I didn't know what I was doing, so I just pretended that I did, and I learned so much within that time. I learned so much within the time I said, yeah, absolutely. And then to actually being on stage, and I don't think anyone knew unless they're watching, sorry guys, but at least it worked. And then from there I kept learning about different stuff, and I'm still learning, like always a student. Like every musician is always a student forever, because you're never done. I mean, look at NAMM.
I know, right?
You can't learn everything that's here in one day or one gig or 1 month or one tour. So
it takes 25 years, dude.
It takes forever. And, you know, so you just have to accept that you're never done learning. And that's what I did on this gig. I hit this point where I realized I am going to be learning for the rest of my life. And once I accepted that, it was so much easier. And it was more fun.
Right?
There was no pressure to be like, you have to get here. It was like, no, you're always going to be.
Now, I'm curious, do you feel like that mentality, that approach to you sort of saying, fuck it, I'm just going to keep doing my best until I get fired or not have this anymore, is that part of your personality? Are you that type of person who just dives in, grabs it, and doesn't let go until someone pries it from you? Or did you sort of learn that as you went along? Or did you maybe learn it because he had to, because he felt like, oh, this is important? You know what I mean?
Kind of both. Like, I knew I had to learn a bunch of things I didn't know. One example is I put a keytar on my rider because I was like, this will be cool. They're never going to actually get me one. They knew who was going to give that to me. Of course they fucking did. And then I was like, yeah, sure. Oh my God, I totally know this. Fuck again.
Yeah, I'm the best
and then I went home and I ran around my apartment and figured it out. And then it ended up being a huge part of the show, which was great. And now I use it for the other artists I play for. But going back into kind of obtaining all of that skill, it very learning on the job and going with that, and it just, I'm trying to like really honestly think about my thought process back then because it was like a few years ago.
I mean, it seems to me like you were just learning on the fly.
I was just learning on the fly, and I was just taking it all in, and every piece of information I took in, I held on to it. And when I get an opportunity like that, even if I'm not fully prepared, I'm very stubborn. So I will just kind of grasp onto it, learn as much as I can, and just do whatever I'm supposed to do, even if it's out of my like initial
comfort zone or
comfort zone. Thank you.
I'm curious. Okay, so then you clearly grabbed this opportunity. You were going after it. You prepared yourself as much as you could, basically going step by step. When you finally went on tour, when you finally did the actual shows, the things that were important, were there ever moments that things happened last minute that you were like, shit, like I'm not prepared at all? But clearly you pulled it off because you're here today and we all know you as a very badass keyboard player. But I would love to know what was going through your mind, and if it actually happened, were there moments where you're like, damn it, I gotta figure this out?
I do have a story that is every musician's worst nightmare.
Oh God, I wanna hear it.
So there's a part in the show where I come out on like a grand piano where there's like fog and it's kind of like a floating part, and you're coming underneath. I'm floating underneath an LED screen, and you have about maybe 1 minute to do a wardrobe change before that part of the show.
1 minute?
Yeah.
Damn.
So what happened during this very infamous minute was that my in-ears got unplugged.
Oh no!
So,
no.
If anyone knows what that feels like, it's the worst because I have a timer telling me how long I have for the wardrobe people to change my outfit. So then it just cuts. And somebody picks me up, puts me on the piano. They don't know, by the way, that this is going on.
Right.
My in-ears are bright turquoise, so I'm like pointing to them. I can't say anything. Everything is so crazy. And I just go out there, and it's just me. And it's of course the part in the show where it's the piano solo part.
Oh my God.
So it's piano only, and then the track, and the band comes in about halfway through that. So I had nothing in my ear. So I'm pointing to my in-ears, looking at the band, like I hope someone sees me, tells someone something. Selena's sitting there kind of talking, and I'm going, just keep going. And eventually somebody realized what was going on, and then they were able to kind of adjust the band to be able to play the song without the piano in there, so I could play very minimally because I can't hear anything. And made it through the song. I get back into the thing, and I don't want to say I had a panic attack, but I'm pretty sure I cried because it's just terrifying. Nothing is worse than being on that stage and not being able to hear shit. It was awful, but it was a great experience, and I'm actually really grateful that it happened because I obviously didn't get fired. But
right.
I'm really grateful that it happened, because now that I know what that feels like, it's less terrifying. It's still terrifying, but
right.
not as much where you think your life's
You went
gonna
through
end.
the worst of the worst, and I was sitting here with my mouth open the whole entire time because I'm a drummer, and that's happened to me before. And there's nothing worse than you understanding that the show, for some of you guys who haven't ever played like a major tour, everything's timed basically, especially when you have big pyrotechnics or anything that's set up to timers. You gotta be on time with everything. And if you're part of that spot where you're playing your solo and you can't hear what's going on and you gotta play with the band, like, oh my God. Like,
and you're starting the song.
Your heart must have just been like, oh my God, like this is it. I'm going home tomorrow.
Well, I have like low-key anxiety just telling the story like 2 years later, so.
I feel the anxiety over here, because that would drive me crazy. I mean, but clearly you made it through. You're a champion at that, it seems to me, that whenever something happens, you just kind of, you hone in, you focus on what you got to do, and you're like, well, let's see what I can do, let's see if I can do the best I can. And it shows, because you're sitting here, you play with the best people. What's next for you then?
Well, and one of the other artists I play for, her name's Madeline Bailey. We're doing a tour in Asia in March.
Nice.
So we're doing Malaysia Music Festival. We have a bunch of dates in China, and I don't have my email in front of me, so I can't tell you the rest of it because I actually don't know it off the top of my head. But so I'm doing some things with her, and then that ball's going to start rolling again. So I'm working with a couple of different artists. I did a tour last summer with opening up for JoJo, and
nice. Love
so
JoJo.
Oh yeah, she's great.
She's fantastic.
She's great. I played for Malia Savets, who was her opener, and yeah, so getting back into touring season starting in March, and I'm just really looking forward to the rest of 2019. There's stuff I can't talk about, which is why I'm
right. That's when you know that you're a badass person, when you've got stuff you can't talk about.
I'm like, this is what I can say out loud.
That's when your life is just so incredible. You're just like, yeah, I'm going to do some cool shit this year, but y'all can't know about it. Just saying.
You'll find out over time when I'm allowed to say things, but yeah.
I love it. Bonnie, you're an amazing musician. I can see with your personality that you are you hone in and you get what you want.
You
do it and you manage it. Thank you so much. Last question from me personally, what's your favorite part about being a touring musician? I'm curious.
My favorite part?
Parts?
Being on stage is my favorite part. That's the cheesiest answer, and it's like, I feel like that's what I'm supposed to say, but to be honest, there is this moment on stage where you get on stage right before the first hit, right before everything, and I always take out my ears so I can hear the crowd, and you hear that, I don't know how to describe this sound, because it's not you don't hear screaming, you just hear this wall of noise.
It's like an atmosphere almost, kind of encompassing your area of sound.
Exactly.
Basically.
And you hear that 1, 2, 3, 4 to start your first song. That is my favorite moment of every show ever, because then it's you just get this adrenaline rush. And then when you're done, you get to just hang out with your friends that you make on tour, and it's just super chill until the next day. But there's always that moment every day where there's so much adrenaline that you forget it's your job.
Yeah.
You forget it's your job for a little bit, and that's my favorite part about touring. So.
It's your life, and you've earned it really well.
Thank you.
Bonnie McIntosh, one of the best musicians I've ever met, and I'm so happy for you, for your success. I'm excited for your badass 2019 that you can't talk about. And I'm excited for you being here. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Miss Bonnie McIntosh, enjoy NAMM 2019.
I will.
And I look forward to hopefully talking with you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you guys so much for having me.